Welcome everybody to tonight's meeting. I'm Sharon Noonan-Gunning. I'm a dietitian. I also I teach dietetics and nutrition. I teach sociology, and I'm also a community food activist. And I've got a long history in activism of all sorts. But since for the last 20 years, it's mainly been around food. And so Food Inequalities Rebellion is a group that myself and others set up. The others are dietitians and nutritionists on the main, who were since austerity were aware that with rising food insecurity and cuts within public services, then the whole concept of social nutrition was disappearing very, very quickly. And so we felt as dietitians, as critical dietitians, nutritionists, that we needed to do something, and that what we needed to do was to link with the grassroots as well. And so that often it's the grassroots people who don't get heard. And so whether that's us as workers, or whether it's people on council estates, ordinary mums, we set up Food Inequalities Rebellion to try and bring people together as practitioners, as community food activists in community, and as academics, to have a political project in order to fight food inequalities, and try and bring, and focusing on class and focusing on the trade unions, really try and bring their voices into policy. Because at the moment, policy, the voice of voice of ordinary people is very much ignored. And so we base ourselves on the grassroots, in the trade unions, on the council estates. We have meetings like this. Plus we organise, community food projects particularly in Lewisham and in Southwark, in Bermondsey. But we do organise, on the ground feeding people as well. And as a means to organising people, we base ourselves on the ideas of Black Panther Party that used politics, used food as a means to help organise people, through having food as providing social nutrition, community hubs, particularly feeding children. Then that's kind of how we base ourselves, on the ideas of Black Panthers, in order to try and get equal rights and justice through the lens of food and through organising around food. And that obviously includes internationalism. We're based in London, and so we have a very international group. We have members from the Sudan who are dietitians in the Sudan. We have community food activists from the States, people who once maybe studied in London but have gone, but then moved back to their countries of origin. So and we have Shira here from a community. She was just saying hi to everybody on chat. So that's we have a very broad group. We want to see public health nutrition brought back into public hands. We want to see it transformed, and so it's it's completely revolutionised around food democracy. We think in order to have food democracy, we need to have local democracy, and that's why we base ourselves at the local level and amongst workers as well. And so we are very grassroots based. We're internationalists, and this is our first sort of international meeting, which we're really proud to be sort of pulling together, because obviously the Indian farmers they've been protesting since September last year, and it's been one of the most inspirational protests ever in the world, not just from the point of view of the men who are on the land and doing, who are leading some of the protests that you see, but it's also the women who are behind them. So that's kind of where we're coming from. Our first speaker, which we were going to have as our first speaker, is Dr. Swaiman Singh. Dr. Swaiman Singh is an American cardiologist, but he's now moved to India, and he's working on the ground, building medical camps and supporting the protesters on the ground. And so he has a charity called the Five Rivers. He will have news from the ground from India when he arrives. Amardeep is he's a socialist, he's a journalist, He writes for the New Socialist. I think he is or was editor of Red Pepper magazine, which I know from back in the day when I was younger. And so it's always been a very, very sort of hip hop young magazine, socialist magazine for very young not young thinkers, but the mind, the thoughts of young people. So it's a very inspirational journal. So, and I also know that Amardeep is involved in Cooperation Town, which is probably one of the most sort of democratic, grassroots democratic organisations for trying to provide to organise food for people who need it on the ground, as opposed to food banks and other sort of austerity retail projects. So that's what I know about Amardeep, and so I'm really, really grateful and pleased that he's here. So I won't say any more. I'll just pass over to you, Amardeep, and if you want to say a little bit more about yourself, and then Amardeep's going to speak about the politics around the struggle, and particularly, and maybe some of the global issues around the sort of the agribusiness and some of the global issues that the Indian farmers have raised.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for inviting me here to speak. So, yeah, as Sharon said, I'm a journalist and an editor and an organizer, primarily a trade union organizer, actually, in hospitality in South London. So I organize with South London Bartenders Network, autonomous worker-led community unionism. I'm also involved in migrant solidarity activism, quite heavily involved in mutual aid stuff, and mutual aid was really when I started thinking about food provision and about its radical potential. And it's a shame actually, because Sharon, if you got in touch with me a few weeks earlier, I just filed a column for Stir to Action investigating what food infrastructure mechanisms there were that might facilitate the kind of long-term civil disobedience that we've seen in Punjab and in India, in the UK. Because one thing that strikes me quite heavily is the fact that the way that the protests in India have been reported on is very much is very orientalist, in the sense that you have these figures, especially of like Sikhs with turbans and beards, and with their kirbans, with their swords, women with their dupattas, with their veils, and very little context in terms of like the class struggle element of what's going on in the way it's being reported. And it strikes me that with the way the UK is going, with the prison industrial complex that's being imported from America, with the detention center complex, with the hardening of the borders and the hostile environment, I foresee a time in the not too distant future, maybe in decades, where the kind of direct, sustained civil disobedience we've seen in the Kisan Andolan, we'll need to do it in the UK if we want to shut down effectively concentration camps for migrants, if we want to shut down offices of fossil fuel companies that are continuing to decimate the planet. These infrastructures and these strategies are things that we really, really need to learn from. And because, unlike Punjab, there's not a culture of langar here, of direct food provision, it's really important that there are political, localized movements that are able to mobilize to lay the foundations for sustaining that civil dissent in the decades to come. I've just seen Dr. Singh is here, and actually it's probably better to hear from him first rather than me going off on one about neoliberalism before we know what we're talking about. So over to you, Baji.
Dr. Singh, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really, really privileged to have you. Amardeep was he's our second, he's also speaking tonight, so he was just sort of opening up. But if you're happy to talk now, then we'll be really pleased to hear sort of from the front line in India what's happening at the farmers and anything that we can do to help. And as I say, I did introduce you earlier on to explain that you're a cardiologist from the United States. I'm a dietitian. We've got other dietitians here. We contacted MEDAC, to some of the international sort of NGOs based in London. And hopefully after tonight's meeting, we're very, very keen to still link up with MEDAC and others to try and promote your work. So amongst the health professionals as well as others. So I won't say any more, but Dr. Singh, if you're happy to, to maybe take the floor now and say a bit about yourself and the struggle of the farmers?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm gonna try to not show the video because it's the data issue. If you have any sound issues, then I'll just stop the video. But thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. It's pretty late. I was just catching up on some dinner. That's why I was late. I'm sorry about that. Things, yes, you introduced me. I was in the final year of my cardiology fellowship. I came here for 5 days, and after seeing some of the stuff I saw, I couldn't get myself to go back. As a doctor, you signed up. I signed up to help, right? And there's never been a greater need in my mind than now. You have a bunch of 60, 70, 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds, 100-year-olds literally sleeping now. At that time it was in cold weather, now it's in hot weather, mosquito season, dengue season, mess, sanitization issues everywhere, with people having problems with water lines, food lines. We're having problem with medication lines, getting them in and out. So, my initial goal was 5 days, was to set up a clinic and go back. Turned into 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, now about to be 4 months, with really no hope of going back anytime soon. It seems like the government is not really listening, and the farmers are in no mood to let up. And if you read the history, Indian history, you would know it pretty clearly that these farmers will not let up. I think we have to just understand that it's basically one man versus maybe this whole society. And I think, the government needs to listen. I hope the government listens. Really, when I came here, I didn't come here as a protester. I come here as somebody who was doing seva, as we would say, or helping. But after I saw what I saw, after I saw the suffering of the farmers, after our doctors were beaten up on January 26th, and all the things I saw, how the government tried to manipulate data, people, into making these really nice people, because these were the people I was living with and I was helping. And when I saw their faces on January 26th, how they were played by the government, and I just could not help myself and literally became part of the protest. That the world has to wake up and help these people. Humanity, as human beings, if somebody, is suffering, then it's all of our troubles, and I always go back to Nazi Germany. I always go back and say, you had time to, help some people, and you didn't. And this has happened in history many times, when you, as society, we had time to speak up, but we failed to speak up because we were too busy in our own lives. We were too busy in our own things. And I think we just as society have to stand together. And when we see wrong being done to a certain group of people, when certain group of people start thinking that they're better than the other group of people, then we just have to stand together and we have to help. And I think there's no better time to show that than now, to help these people who literally don't have any political gains. They don't have, they're literally, right now, most of these people are 60, 70, 80, 90-year-old people, who are, some people are, haven't seen their grandkids in, 9 months. They're, people who haven't seen their children. I haven't seen my daughter. There are people like us, these were normal people who had normal lives. And now they feel that they're trying to be turned into slaves, modern day slavery, and they just don't want it. And I think somehow the government should listen to that. And that's what we're trying to do, is like, hey, these people were quiet. These people are not, violent. They're nice people. All they're trying to say is, hey, the government, please listen to us. And every time you listen to them, the government tried to mend the laws, meaning that there was something wrong with them. Most of, not if all of the people who have any educational background in farming, in economics, has kind of turned these laws into black laws, saying I shouldn't have used that word, but anyway, that these are anti-farm laws. And I'm a doctor. I don't know anything about laws. I don't know anything about farming. I don't know anything about protest. I don't know anything about anything except medicine. But when these educated people are telling me that, hey, this is wrong for them, and when I saw what I saw on January 26th and everything that I'm seeing now with human rights violations, there's nothing more I can do but help these people the way we are helping. We have a team of about 220 volunteers that were present on January 26th. Now we have a team of over 1,000 people, many doctors, nurses from around the world, UK, Canada, United States, that we teamed up through our telemedicine and people on the ground as well. Doing a great job day in and day out. Our morning starts from, or my morning starts early, if I get to sleep at night, with emergency calls from patients at night. Literally, we save, I think, on average, about 3 lives a day. People, with banged up heads or, wounds everywhere, from somebody falling from, there was a guy who literally was trying to make a bamboo house, and he had an electric cutter. And as he was cutting the bamboo stick, he literally cut off his own leg. So, bleeding everywhere. So these are the cases that we saw. And we know if we weren't there, that this kid would have died. So, cases like this happen every day, usually about an average of 3. And most of these patients are trauma patients or, really bad diabetics with the blood glucose touching like 800s, 900s, or, readings that just stayed high. So, helping in the clinic where, we have water filtration systems that we have put up. We have bathrooms that we have put up. We have modi khana, what we call, which is basically we put up, a store filled with things anywhere from toothbrushes to washing machines that we go and we see where there's a need and we try to help the people with those needs. Soaps, detergents, food items like flour, sugar, tea. We have a library where we, these elderly people or young people who want to come in and, instead of putting their minds into other things and being depressed about the current situation, we try to set them up with the library where they come, read books, talk to people, and try to just let go of some of the things that are happening in their day-to-day. We have a movie theater where we play movies every other day or so. Again, at night, the movies are usually regarding, how to, about different laws, also sometimes humor, comedy, just to get the people out of the, this, again, the depression that they're in. Some other things that we're doing right now, the big things, we give out milk in the morning through our chicory, we try. We also, another thing we are doing is building houses, giving out mosquito nets. We have a goal to build 1,000 houses at Tikri. Then we have a goal to build at least 100 houses at Singhu, which is another border. Currently, we are at about 450 houses plus. Each house costs around, for a 15 by 20 bamboo house, costs about 25,000 rupees, which is about $350. I'm not sure what it is in pounds, probably like 300 pounds for a house that houses 20 people or so. I think I put up some pictures of those houses on Instagram, on Facebook. You guys can check it out. But they're really nice, amazing. Like, we cover it up with mosquito nets. So you're mosquito proof, you're malaria proof. It's a very clean environment, ready for the summer. And the reason we started building these, people were suffering. I lost my first patient to malaria now it's been about 20 days. And that's when we took this step of building these houses, and then we, put this green mosquito net around. We usually put a fan up as well. And it's really, for the whole cost of the whole thing, merely 25,000 rupees, basically stands at about 1,000 rupees per person per head. It's a great initiative. We urge people to get involved in that initiative. I mean, to be able to help. Right now, what we need in daily living is food, shelter. I think that's a necessity, right? Everything else is extra. So that's what we're trying to do, is give people food, give people shelter, and everything else, medicine and all that is extra. So if people want to get involved, again, that's a great initiative. Build some houses, right? And as per our organization, just want to let you guys know, we've been working for about past 10 years. We were recognized for about past 2 years now. Some of the initiatives we have taken up were holding medical camps at underserved areas. We also have sponsored some schools. We have tried to give out sports equipment, run a wrestling akhada, we call it in Punjabi, where we basically give shelter and teach wrestling to kids, basically trying to get these kids, out of drugs and such things. Our future initiatives will include building libraries around areas in Asia, investing in schools, investing in education, investing in healthcare. Again, our big things, are healthcare and education. Our motto is education and healthcare for all, and that's what we stand by. Regardless of your caste, your color, your creed, regardless of whatever you are, at the end of the day, you're a human being and you deserve education, equal education. You deserve equal healthcare. To get involved in our organization, to donate, to help, you can please log on to www.5riversheart.org. I repeat, www.5riversheart.org. That's the best way to get involved and donate. All donations will be tax exempt. And you can, if you're having trouble, you can email through the website on our website. I think it's join5heart@gmail.com, or it's probably linked through the website. And you can ask our team or any queries. And that's it. If you guys have any question, I'll be happy to answer those.
Thank you, Swaiman. That was brilliant. That's absolutely phenomenal. You can't clap on Zoom. It's crazy. It's like, so I don't know what we do, but thank you so much. And I mean, your work is just providing the infrastructure for a protest, to enable a protest, is absolutely phenomenal. It's something like, people couldn't protest if they didn't have food and shelter. And so, and I know you I mean, many of us here are also medics, but I mean, the right to education and food for all is a political demand. So it's, whether we like it or not, we all get pulled into politics. But thank you so much.
Can I just say this, that you mentioned politics? Just remember, I have nothing to do with politics.
Yes.
I'm, the day this is over, I'm coming back to America. I have a perfect life. I gave up a job, a career. I have a 2-year-old daughter. I have no plans of anything here, and I kind of made that clear. We're not linked to any political party. We're not linked to any religious group. We're not linked to anybody. We are an NGO that's working hard for the people. Right now, our work is for the people. And these laws, basically, I'm not sure if people are aware, but these laws are going to take away the land. They're going to take away the land of the people, and they're going to. India is primarily agriculture society, where basically, till now, people have had the liberty to be able to sell their products anywhere, and everybody has the liberty to basically get something, a price that they can set for their own products. That, if I'm going to sell a shoe, then it should be in my hand how much I want to sell the shoe for. Then it's on you want to buy it or not, but I should have the liberty to sell the shoe for what. That's all the farmers are asking for. They're saying it's my right to do whatever I want with my land. And right now they're saying we don't want these laws, or we are the majority in this country. We don't. And from anywhere, if you come to these protests, it's pretty clear. It's very non-political. Anybody who is linked to a political party is not allowed to be here. Anybody who talks about politics is kicked out. Right now, all over India, if you bring politics to this, regardless you're with us or you're without us, if you are involved in politics, you cannot be here and talking on stage. You're not given time. Yeah, if you want to come and donate through another channel, like, give products, give whatever, yes, we'll take it, right? People will take it. But they're very careful in taking those things. Very apolitical. It has nothing to do with politics. I think we should make the world, very clear. It is not a religious movement. We're very against that. For anybody who promotes this as a religious thing, this has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with politics. It's clearly human beings who are asking for their rights to live, to be able to sell their products on the market for the prices they set. This is going to turn into a 5-man country if this goes on. That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I think from our group, we will definitely campaign to build links and build resources through your NGO. Definitely, as best we can. We will definitely do that. So Amardeep, do you want to say a few words and then we can have questions to you both?
Yeah, first of all, Baji, it's an absolute privilege to be on a call with you, with someone doing the solidarity work and the mutual aid on the ground. Massive amounts of respect to you for that, and thank you. And I know that principle of seva, of selfless service, is rooted in Sikhi, and I know it's not something that's politicizable in maybe the way that we're used to talking about politics. Now, that being said, my background as a journalist is around global politics. It's about migration, the hostile environment. And in the UK left, one term that gets overused a lot, which is neoliberalism, right? So in terms of what these laws actually mean, the 3 laws that Modi has introduced, which are called the Kala Qanun, they essentially do 3 things, right? And they open up Indian agriculture to neoliberalization. And so the first thing is that at the moment, grain, primarily in Punjab and Haryana, in the northwestern states, is sold in state-run mandis, at which there's MSPs, minimum support prices, that are guaranteed, which in theory protect small farmers in particular from being exploited by corporations that would otherwise negotiate with them directly, drive prices down. And the 3 laws basically legalize and promote direct negotiation between corporations and small-scale farmers without adequate legal recourse in the case of malpractice. They remove restrictions on firms' abilities to hoard food supplies, which potentially means they could, hoard grain, drive up prices, manipulate the domestic market. And, as Baji was saying, in a country in which 60% of the working population is involved in agricultural labor, the consequences of that will be catastrophic. Now, at the same time, from my perspective and my analysis at least, and from the analysis of people that I know on the ground over at Indian Dolan as well, what we're seeing happening from the Indian states isn't in many senses historically a new thing. In many senses, in an article for New Socialist, I argued that it's actually congruent with trends over the past 5 decades in India with regards to agriculture. And I don't know if there's time, but I can very quickly take us through that if that's something people are interested in. Or okay, so super quickly to race through it. You can trace this right back to the British Empire, right? So 1849, the East India Company annexes Punjab, which is a northern Sikh kingdom at the time. And as soon as it does that, it invests in a huge system of irrigation. So it promotes canals so that it can enable large-scale cash crop farming, so tobacco, sugar, wheat, and it can be exported again out through the canal systems, right? The Raj also introduces this administrative system, this formalization of existing caste dynamics, which means that land ownership, which was, often familial, but also individual, and often happened along caste lines, now that became cemented in the legal apparatus. And what that really does is it ensures the caste system in India endures because it's encoded into the legislature. So my family and the family of lots of farmers, Ajat, which means kind of landowning peasants. And those were the ones that mostly owned the land in Punjab and in India and northern India, whereas Dalits, who are laborers, didn't get allocated any land under the empire, because traditionally, they were untouchables. They didn't have the right to farm it. That is a really important dynamic, because one of the main rallying cries of the farmers movement in India at the moment is Kisan Mazdoor Ekta Zindabad, which means long live farmer labor unity. So when we talk about the farmers protest, it's actually really important from an anti-caste narrative to talk about the farmer laborer movement, because the movement couldn't be what it was at the moment if it hadn't been for the laborers showing solidarity with people who in many cases had actually historically oppressed them. During the Kisan Andolan, which is the farmers movement, farmers and laborers movement, there have been some rousing speeches by some trade union figures, one at the Ghazipur border, I think, or it might have been Tikri, is credited with single-handedly, essentially, rousing more people to join the movement when it looked like they were facing down intense police violence, right? And this guy became a bit of a social media celebrity, right? Loads of us in the diaspora were clamoring and saying, this guy's amazing, where's he been? Incredible rhetoric. And then you do some research, and the same person in 2013 is implicated in caste-based riots against low caste Dalit Muslim laborers. And yet those are the same laborers that have turned up to support the movement. So there are lots of fraught solidarities that you can, trace right back to the days of the empire. Now, the attack on the current market system is kind of rooted in when it was introduced in the first place, right? So the minimum support pricing and the Mundi, the state-run marketing system, was part of a Cold War compromise in effect, right? Because the choice facing India was either a red revolution in which land distribution and land appropriation was on the table, or between a more traditional extractivist capitalism. The Green Revolution, as it became known, was a compromise between these two things. So it had subsidies for inputs for farming, it had benefits, it had local loans, and it was regulated, but it involved no central reappropriation of the land and the raw materials and the resources. And so what happens is that as the World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, and these ex-colonial powers, especially in the 70s, as America is experiencing a crisis of overproduction, they start looking to the global south at previously protected markets in the 70s as novel avenues for profit, right? At the same time, remember, a lot of ex-colonized nations are reliant on aid from the global north. Now, one way in which this gets leveraged, this kind of soft power, is that a proviso of loans being given to states in the global south is that they are used for certain approved infrastructure developments, right? So you can't just take a chunk of money and say, we're going to put this into agriculture. No. The route that was prioritized by the IMF and the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the Rockefeller Foundation, is private tubewells, private systems of irrigation based on the theory of the poor but efficient farmer that encode private profit maximization into the development of Indian agriculture from the 70s. And because private tubewell irrigation was subsidized, because fertilizers were subsidized, patented seeds were subsidized, it created extremely efficient in the short-term production, which meant huge, soaring profits for small-scale farmers in the short term. But it also creates long-term dependency in a way that's not ecologically sustainable. And eventually it's led to, a huge proportion of India's farmers being dependent on American companies who have patented seed, who rely on, these seeds need fertilizers. The fertilizers are no longer subsidized. Some of the seeds, at the turn of the century were Terminator seeds, which meant that they were genetically modified to render the next seeds that they produced infertile. They couldn't be reproduced. And that has contributed to a suicide epidemic of hundreds of thousands since the late 90s across northwestern India in particular. And as all of this has been playing out, by the time you get to 1991, the mid-90s, domestic actors inside India are able to make a strong case to say, this isn't working, we're too reliant on the global north, everything is inefficient, the mandis are corrupt, let's now shift from state-led agriculture to private-led agriculture. And that's really when what Modi has done now with these 3 laws, you know, it's a final death knell of the dream of the Green Revolution. It's the culmination of a neoliberal project. This is not actually something new. This is the final sticking point. And that's why the farmers and laborers are fighting so hard against it, because really after this, it's going to open them up to national and international, huge moneyed, powerful interests. And it's going to really diminish their capacity to fight back. And, you know, many of us in the diaspora are just really grateful, especially to people like Dr. Singh, who in a non-politicized capacity, providing mutual aid and solidarity that's actually enabled these people to fight for their rights. But yeah, so that's kind of the wider, that was maybe a bit rushed, but I didn't want to give you the entire book, if you'll excuse me. But yeah, thank you for having me. I'll leave it there for now, I think.
Thank you, Amardeep. Thank you, Swaiman. But both, that's absolutely brilliant. It's you know, the understanding the history from Amardeep, particularly for those of us who are involved in nutrition and in food policy, then that background's really, really critical. And then seeing where it's led now and the struggles that it's led to now, and what needs to be done in terms on the ground to support those people for their very, very livelihoods. So I won't say any more. I'll just open it up to anybody who's got any questions to either Swaiman or Amardeep, or anything you want to say or ask, or any ideas on how we can build solidarity across London.
I think one thing that I think it's important to mention is that there's a degree of complicity in what's happening in India with these 3 laws being rammed through directly with us in the imperial core, right? And the way that functions primarily is that big tech corporations like Facebook, and which owns WhatsApp, has a 10% share in Geokrishi, which is an Indian multinational section of the Ambani or Advani group, I can't remember. Anyway, their aim is to digitize food production and food procurement from farm to fork, is what they call it. They can only do this once the current state-regulated system has collapsed. That will happen with the private involvement that's being facilitated by these new laws. That food procurement system has WhatsApp Pay encoded into it. It looks on the surface like essentially partnering with this app is what enabled WhatsApp Pay to get access to Indian markets. WhatsApp is obviously owned by Facebook. The players in considering what agricultural laws in India or in Southern Africa, for that matter as well, that it's very much British people who are at the top of these companies that are also benefiting from those maneuvers. And I think in that context, it's really, really important to think about, when it's safe to do so, and maybe not on a Zoom call, what kind of direct action there are that could raise attention to the fact that this is a global complex. This is not just a localized struggle, because the powers that are perpetuating these injustices aren't localized.
Somebody asked the question that how does this affect globally? Because if you're sitting in England or you're sitting in America, why should you care? The reason I say this to everybody is, like, if there's a protest going on in Africa, if there's a Black Lives Matter protest going on in America, that means there's something going on in the world, right? Where lives are being, they're being pressured, or there might be something going on that's not right for humanity, not for anything else, but for that matter, just for humanity. So all we're saying is, don't pressure, don't do anything. Just do one thing: read about these laws, as Amardeep stated. See if they're actually good for these people or bad for these people. Come to a conclusion that, yeah, you know what, the government might be doing something wrong here. Or, you know what, these people are wrong. The government is actually looking out for them. So if you reach a conclusion that the government is actually doing something wrong to them, then it doesn't matter how it helps globally or not, that you as a human being should speak up for these people. Because what that does is creates a circle. You know, you start when you went to school, you got bullied, somebody spoke up for you. Your state, you know, there was a disaster in Louisiana, Michigan stepped up, New York stepped up. There was something that happened in Syria, something that happened in UK, others stepped up. Nazi Germany happened, other countries stepped up and say, hey, you know what, that might be a little wrong. And the country said, oh, you know what, yeah, that's right. So if there's something as, you know, human beings, where you feel that somewhere around the world, something is going wrong, you should speak up, because that same wrong can be happening to you tomorrow. And then you're gonna expect other people to stand up. Or the whole world can say, oh, you know what, that doesn't really affect me. Oh, those, you know, that's a 1% of the population, or that, you know, small group of people, you know, that they're just Jews, or, you know what, they're just Muslims, or they're just Sikhs, you know, they just make up this much part of the population. Why does that matter? It matters because when you feel something is wrong, something, you know, is not right, then you should, as human beings, speak up. That's all.
That's really well said, Baji. Absolutely agree with all of that. I was just going to say that, you know, it's hard to know practically what it means in London or the UK to speak up in that context, right? And, you know, from my perspective, one of the most effective things that we can do to actually support the Kisan Andolan movement is, actually, strange as it may seem, fighting against the hostile environment and the border regime in the UK. The reason I say that is because at the moment, a British citizen, Jagtar Singh Johal, is being held in India, supposedly for Khalistani separatist activities. 3 Sikhs from the West Midlands were seized in dawn raids a few months ago. They're due to be, what's the term? I can't remember. Deported for trial in India. And so the Indian government is using the ghost or the spectre of Sikh separatism, of Khalistani separatism, to oppress the protesters. It is also doing that. It is also scaring the diaspora by leaning on the British government to deport citizens and not to help undesirables that are, you know, detained by the Indian state. The reason the British government is open to that is because we need a good trade deal post-Brexit with India. And the border regime is the way by which those kind of transactions happen between nations once trade, you know, when it's all about trade and it's not actually about human rights. So I say organizing against hostile environment is one of the most important things that you can do, because as people, once we're detained, we are resources in trade deals between states, is what I would argue. You can probably guess my politics from this. Another thing that we can do, though, is actually not on a Zoom call. Again, there do be cops, but direct action works. When it's not a pandemic, when you're working with people that you trust, you can follow the paper trails. You can find where companies that are directly funding the agri-tech and agri-logistics industries in India, the parent companies have subsidiary companies that are registered in London. We can find where they are. We can do various things that are entirely legal to raise awareness about it. But I think it's important to raise them in the context of the police violence that we've seen in Bristol, the police violence we've seen in Manchester, in London, and that I've seen firsthand in the last weeks following Sarah Everard and the Police Crime and Sentencing Bill. So I think we have to, when we talk about what it means to speak up, it's recognizing that in the imperial core, you can take direct action to facilitate struggle in the South.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Amardeep. Kemi was asking about solidarity. What other concrete types of solidarity can we build? In my mind, we can, those of us who are in the health professionals, we can raise this through the health system and try and get, you know, solidarity within the health system for the work of Dr. Swaiman Singh. We can do that and try and get support for, you know, different unions to, you know, to sponsor a house. We can put a concrete demand to different trade that, you know, that they do something. So we can do that. And then also from the point of view of food policy, it's like this bigger picture of where is Britain heading. and the trade laws, and and the points that Amardeep was making about how do we raise people's consciousness about where this is all heading, and how there's a divide and rule going on, that people are being split off from each other, communities are being split off from each other through the hostile environment. And so trying to knit, I know it can give one a headache, you go, oh, how do you do it? But trying to knit it all together, I think is really important. So if anybody has any ideas, and I'm an old direct action hands from the past, although I think it's much more dangerous to do it these days than it was back in the 1980s. But I do, well, maybe not, I don't know. But I mean, I do think it's, that definitely. Any ideas on solidarity or any questions?
Guys, I work in the NHS and the council. I was wondering, could the council be involved, and how could the NHS be involved as a healthcare provider?
I think it's interesting. I think to a degree, you can use council infrastructure in terms of when it's not a pandemic. You can use town halls or community centres and TRAs, tenants and residents associations. You can use councils and community hubs by way of networking, in your area, to meet people who might be like-minded or to raise awareness. But I do think that when it comes to actually, showing direct support, apart from, consciousness and awareness raising, actually most of the work that has to be done is kind of on the ground and outside of the existing structures. So the kind of food provision infrastructures, especially from a non-charitable perspective, that you were talking about earlier, Sharon, and the kind of work that, Corporation Town or Food Not Bombs have been doing, that kind of solidarity, radical organizing around food provision, encoding food provision as actually a really, intensely political part of care, the politics of care. I think those are really, really vital. And I do think as well, it's really important that, especially for people that maybe are new to organizing or new to activism, the shiny stuff is obviously the politics of spectacle. Who doesn't love a march? Bloody love a march, me. But actually, it's having support networks, solidarity systems, structures in place that are going to care for you when you're down and care for those around you. That's where the real work goes, and that's much more stressful and much more intense often than being kettled by police in Westminster, from my experience.
So I think, I can't remember who mentioned it, but you mentioned that this has been going on for like 9 months. And also it was mentioned that that basically India is holding the UK to task, or over a barrel, basically, because of the Brexit deal. Now, I also know that India is also making a lot of vaccines for the coronavirus for the world and for the UK as well. So, I mean, how much longer would we have to like put up with, or do you think our government will put up with all of the atrocities happening over there? And when do you think that they'll be able to actually start, holding India to task for what they're doing, instead of waiting for all these deals and stuff to come through? When is now? What time is now to take action?
I have an answer, but it's not a nice one.
Go for it.
So essentially, I think the problem is that, recently we heard a government minister say that the idea that we shouldn't trade with nations that commit human rights abuses was an economic fact. It didn't make sense economically. The government has been very open about that. Added to that, the Conservative Party's agenda, generally speaking, has been an acceleration of like neoliberalism when it comes to economics, when it comes to privatization. What's happening to Indian agriculture is only what's happening to the NHS here, right? So when it comes to, I wouldn't even say it's that India is holding us to task or got us over a barrel. I'd say that we've got two right-wing states that are happy to stoke nationalism to line their own pockets and further neoliberal agendas, and they're quite happy to do that hand in hand. And so, I think it's important to have MPs like Tandesi and Nadia Whitten, Zara Sultana. It's really important that they speak out about it, because it's important that the world knows that it's not just, the current British state doesn't represent the entirety of Britain, of the UK. But I also I think we've gone past the point personally where the old lawmakers and peacekeepers of the international regime actually have any credit or have the same will that they once have to enforce liberal ideas. So yeah, it's a really crappy answer. I'm sorry. I am fun at parties, I promise, but.
I mean, I think just the main thing, just for me, people were asking the kind of things that can be done. So voice is really important in a safe way. So if you can gather voices, obviously voices of families, voices of farmers themselves, for people who are living through it, that's important. What's going on, changes that are happening. So, and obviously without names, all of these things have to be anonymous, so we're not putting anyone at risk. But if you can gather voices, that kind of evidence has much more power than, people, however, good NGOs are and stuff. Our voice is only strong if we have the voices from the field. So I think if you have, the opportunity to work with people on the ground there and gather those voices. So again, if we have the privilege of using our voice, and again, many here at this table do, it's much more powerful if those voices are not your own, that you're using, that you're trying to bring the stories. And stories are much more powerful to galvanize action when we tell things as they're going. So as I said, it's great to hearing, some of the things going on. But even just taking, sometimes the world gets immune from numbers and numbers of large amounts of atrocity. So sometimes just telling a story of one person, of one group of farmers, can be much more powerful. So as I said, if anyone has got access to do that, those sorts of stories definitely build really good solidarity groups. And then, if you go to, and they tend to be much more powerful with MPs or politicians. I suppose I would be slightly a little bit of, even though I say we're not political, I just think there's no health and nutrition that's not political. I mean, health and nutrition is totally political. And I just think we have to be careful. In other words, if we say we're not, then that means that the politics, the people who are political, which is a lot of the donors and stuff, means that our voice won't be heard, or the voice of the people won't be heard. So I think if it's not about being political, it's about being the voice, getting the voices, and getting them to the places where decisions are made. And so going to the forum, getting the voices, getting the stories, writing the stories. So yes, action's important, but really action's only really powerful when it has voices from the field. So I think if you guys could capture those and bring them together, even a little book, is Sharon has some funding examples of some of the things that are looking for some citizen science things and stuff. There's a very strong network in India on People's Health Movement, the Right to Health movement. They have links all over India. So again, trying to bring together some of that. So there's a lot of people working in this area from India. So if you can link up with any of them, I think that would be really powerful to give them a platform, because sometimes their voices never get out of India. So that would be really good to bring it to another stage.
And also for me, it's like strategically, it's like the time, we've lost Dr. Swaiman Singh, but the time frame and all this, because I understand that the farmers aren't going to give in. And so this is going to be a long struggle. So the work of Dr. Swaiman's really important to build a support network, to give them food and shelter, to enable them. And obviously he's seeing the age of the people, that it's people who are extremely old who are leading the protests. And so and it's also just the time frame. I know we're in lockdown now, but it's where looking ahead in Britain, then when are the key moments going to come when this can be raised, and where are the key movements now? So I know that there have been protests in London of many sort of young Sikhs, and are there, what are the key movements? Do you know, Amardeep?
I mean, obviously, like most diaspora or faith communities in the UK, like who you should get in touch with to do stuff is like a minefield of like community politics. That said, there are some groups that are doing really important work. I know that in terms of like actions, the solidarity action that was called a few months ago got hit with a 10 grand fine for breaking COVID, despite the fact that, the preceding anti-lockdown process hadn't. I think you know, the way that racialized people are policed when we're constructing resistance, especially in the pandemic, has limited the actual organizing that you can do in a visible manner. I suppose it maybe makes the solidarity work and the funding for that all the more important and all the more vital while these restrictions are in place. But aside from that, I know that Sikh socialists and National Sikh Youth Federation, Khalsa Aid, Sikh Coalition, all of these groups, some of them who don't get along with others, undoubtedly, but a lot of them are, you know, doing really important work in terms of awareness raising and planning.
And then also like the companies who are involved in this. But the American farmers' story is tragic. You know, what's happened to the American farmers, some of them have done well out of neoliberalism. Some of them have been, you know, they have to mortgage their land. They have to mortgage everything to the company. And as they call themselves slaves to the company. And so that's, so I'm just wondering, who are these companies? There's not many of them. And when do we start developing a strategy towards exposing these, lifting the lid on some of these?
What you're talking about there is contract farming, really, right? And the reason why some farmers in the States have managed to do okay with it is only because agriculture in the US has a really strong tradition of militant trade unionism, right? That's the only reason that they've managed to shield themselves to a degree. But contract farming is what the new laws are introducing on a widespread scale in India. It's the same thing. And there are these clusters of conglomerates that control the entire global food supply, right? Which is why getting into Africa and getting into India is so important, because then they can consolidate their hold entirely. In terms of where the links are and following the paper trail, that will take like a detailed power structure analysis. And I would also just say this isn't even entering into that kind of thing isn't something that you do like over a Zoom call or with people you don't trust. I don't want to scare people or be tinfoil hat, but like I'm sure you know how it is, Sharon.
Yeah.
So I think maybe facilitating a safe space and a mechanism of trust for people that are serious in terms of following the paper trail. Maybe that could be a good start. I don't know.
Yeah. Because for me, it's what happened to the British, you know, with the free trade in Britain. I mean, that's the, you know, we have to stand by the Indian farmers, because what happens to them will happen to farmers here. I know that farmers are bigger, but the British farmers will have no chance if, you know. So I do think, I haven't got the answers, but I do think somehow we have to think it through about how we can, you know, bring all this and bring it to the pub. I do think we have to link it in together.
Yeah, and actually one thing that's just occurred to me is actually a lot of these companies that are, you know, like Pepsi Food Limited, for example, opened one of the first contract farming sites in Punjab in Chandigarh, maybe 2 decades ago now. These companies also obviously run fast food outlets in the UK, right? One way you can do this is by organizing on the shop floor, by promoting trade unionism in companies and in sites that are owned or franchised by these wider conglomerates. Once you're in a position to do that and you've got union density, obviously we can't do solidarity strikes because trade union legislation is very regressive here, but you can still show solidarity and try and connect the struggle of workers on the shop floor to the wider exploitation and extractivism that they're facilitating in the South. And that's a starting point, I guess.
The space Amardeep, the space we kind of we try to, occupy as dietitians, nutritionists, and food people is really around food being political and trying to raise these broader questions within our movement, because, well, we haven't got a movement, but, you know, within the food movement is depoliticized. It's you know, the whole point of what's happened in the UK is, you know, it's all been privatized, it's been charitized. You have this whole food voluntariat that needs to be repoliticized. So what we see, part of our job is in Food Inequalities Rebellion is to try and bring that politics into the wider food movement. And so, you know, and to not compromise on it, and to show that, you know, the issues around universality, the issues around, you know, social rights, the internationalism, these are the issues that we really want to try and but we're still we're still quite a young group.
Well, yeah, of course. And I mean, it's hard as like a new group, especially to start thinking in a pandemic, to start thinking about what does it mean to live out internationalism. What does it mean to showcase it? Those are huge questions. People don't have the answer. It's a practice and it takes time, and there's so many different angles. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the work of Angry Workers at all.
I think so.
So they spent a while organizing in food packaging warehouses in Greenford, on the outskirts of London, and the way that they talk about food production and distribution is really, really interesting. I don't think they were especially successful organizers, but their analysis is really, really good, and they look at the fact that if you were able to organize this primarily migrant, primarily working class people of color precariat, who basically deal with a huge proportion of the food that comes into London through these warehouses in Greenford. If you were able to unionize that, mobilize that, politicize that, you could show solidarity with farmers in India, for example, by actually having London in a chokehold in terms of food supply coming into the capital. Like that would get politicians' attention. That would try and actually, achieve something on the international stage. There's a reason it hasn't been done, obviously, because it's like really fucking difficult. Sorry, I probably shouldn't swear. But there's lots of different avenues, and you can tease out those connections. I think that's the most important part. It's so easy to think of our struggles as being really atomized, especially if we're engaged in work locally. It's just important to keep drawing out those narratives and those threads.
So I think some people might be are sort of beginning to say goodbye. So does anybody want to get involved in Food Inequalities Rebellion? We can't do anything unless we have activists. We really do need activists. So if you're involved, whatever you're involved in, public health, nutrition, if you're a food worker, then please just, let us know. Thanks, Amardeep. Thanks so much. Good.
Bye.
Take good care. Bye. Bye.